So I'm currently making a video about playstyles in Bluelock, and when making the video, I had so much trouble ranking players that were good, but only because of their weapons. Some of these characters we all know, Nagi being a really good example, and probably the best example being Julian Loki, who beat Rin's team with just his speed alone. So that got me wondering about players who are defined from their weapons, how well they shape up against players with multiple weapons, and it just led to the result of what I like to call an absolute weapon. So in this video, I want to go over these absolute weapons in Bluelock, how well they actually work, and how it'll be important for the rest of the series moving forward. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe and like button, super appreciated, and it supports me a lot. Also finally opened up a community Discord, so if you're interested in discussing anything Bluelock or just anything in general, join up, the link is in the description. I'll always be chatting in there and being active, giving updates and whatnot. And I got a lot of community stuff planned, so join up, you don't want to miss that. With that being said though, let's get straight into the video and absolute weapons. So an absolute weapon, this is what I'm just gonna call it, is a weapon that is pretty much top of the line and just overwhelming that they don't need any other weapons or abilities because their absolute weapon makes up for it. Now obviously they can have secondary skills, secondary weapons, but they're mostly known for that absolute weapon. Shidou is probably a really good example of this. Shidou has a bunch of skills, one of them being good analysis skills, but we all know him for his insane scoring capability in the goal zone. This is what I call an absolute weapon, something so destructive, so absolute that it can beat out players who have other skills like long reach, fast reflexes, etc. Like I said before, I was making a video about playstyles and had a super hard time basing it off of characters that were just weapon specific. A good example of this would be Baro versus Shidou. Baro has predator eyes, his 28-meter shot, chop dribbling, you know, all the skills we've already seen, and then you just got Shidou who has that one insane weapon in the goal box. The fact that Baro has all those skills, all those weapons and more, and it's still a pretty close debate against Shidou's one absolute weapon, just shows how dangerous an absolute weapon like his is. And for further clarification, an absolute weapon does have to be something super strong, super overwhelming, super absolute, and it can't just be something like Igaguri and fouling. So even though a character like Chigiri, who has his whole playstyle about his speed, and it's a really good weapon, I mean he's fast, it's not really an absolute weapon because it gets countered. But on the other hand, someone with the same weapon, Loki, made it into an absolute weapon where he can just leave everyone in the dust, even if they know where he's going.
But I'm fast.
So from that, we can see that Loki's speed literally counters people who even have good spatial awareness, and I believe that's what a true absolute weapon is. Something so strong that you just can't counter it. And it doesn't just have to be speed or scoring. I definitely consider Nagi's trapping skills to be an absolute weapon, his whole playstyle being built on it, and then he can deliver with it. We see that he uses his absolute weapon to literally counter defenders, reset the tempo, and amongst other things as well. Now that you know what an absolute weapon is, I want to put it against a regular playstyle to see if they actually work and how well they would do against them. The first question is pretty obvious. Does it work? Yes. Almost all of the characters you'd consider being the best have an absolute weapon. Like, just think of the best players you can think of in Bluelock, and they probably have an overwhelming strength like that. Sai comes to mind with his dribbling, Kaiser comes to mind with Kaiser Impact, and hell, even all of the World 5 just had an absolute weapon. I think you get my point. It's a pretty obvious one. People with strong weapons are strong players, and I think that's pretty much a given, but the actual question would be, how well would they fare against these flexible players? I said it before, but when you put these players with multiple skills against players with absolute weapons, you're gonna have a hard time actually figuring out who's better. Baro versus Shidou, Isagi versus Bachira, and Nagi versus Ryo, the list goes on, and that's why it's such a hard question. Is a flex style better or an absolute weapon better? The flex style pretty much gives you everything you need. Rin is a good one, Isagi is a good one, and Ryo is also a good one. So when you compare that flex style, all of these skills, and combining them and whatnot, is it better than one absolute skill? The only answer I can give that won't upset everyone is to say it's situational. It's a pretty cop-out answer, but it's pretty true. Like, if you're trying to be purely a striker, then an absolute weapon would help more than something like off the ball or more spatial awareness. But if you have those other weapons, you can give yourself more opportunities to score, as seen with literally our MC Isagi. Isagi uses all his other skills like off the ball, metavision, and other stuff to give him more opportunities to score and use his other weapons. The most recent occurrence of this would be him using metavision to go full throttle and then scoring with his lefty direct shot. And if you're not a striker, you can be more flexible in other positions as well. I think Ryo is a really good example for that. Looking at my tier list, which I'll release sometime when I'm done editing with this video, it's like 20 minutes long. More people with absolute weapons ranked higher than more flexible characters. That's why I had such a hard time ranking and figuring out where everyone's playstyle goes. In my tier list video, you'll see everyone I rank, the reasons why, and the actual comparison between a flex player and an absolute weapon player. Like I said before, it really is situational, but in a list like that, when you're going one-on-one, it's so much easier. Like, I can't flat out say that absolute weapons are better than being flexible, but then you have the fact that Loki beat out all of these flexible players without even giving them a chance. You see what I mean? He is a 1 in a million talent, and I can't just base absolute weapon just off of him. But he did get to where he is because of his ground and improvement, and keep that in mind for later. Because they both have their pros and cons, and you can't really group everyone together like that, so that's why I say it's super situational. However, what I do know is that absolute weapons will play a super big role in the future of Bluelock. So the first thing I see absolute weapons playing a huge role in is, of course, our boy Isagi. I see him developing one of his weapons into an absolute weapon. Probably Metavision, but it kind of already almost is. By making one of his weapons into an absolute weapon, he's going to be able to counter these other absolute weapons easier with his own. It's the only possible counter to these super strong players like Loki or the World 5. He can use it to better support him using Metavision, which we see that he actually is by training and literally telling Hiyori, and he could turn into an absolute weapon. And I'm not gonna lie, an absolute weapon Metavision just sounds super sick. I don't know how it's gonna work. Maybe bro will just somehow see the play-by-play, but I'm not entirely sure. But from me talking, you could just see how big of an impact it does have, and I think that big impact will actually give an even more significant role for the players who we haven't really seen or are more underrated. Let's take Zantetsu for example, since I just made a whole video about him and everything being underrated. Zantetsu, like Chigiri, is fast. We all know that at this point, but he's not being used to his fullest potential because his weapon is not at his fullest potential. It's not an absolute weapon, and maybe he could be faster, maybe he could increase his zone, anything along the lines of that he could improve and turn explosive acceleration into an absolute weapon. You see what I mean? And I think it's just perfect because he is also with Loki and PXG, who has probably the best absolute weapon out there as well. Loki has the exact same weapon as Zantetsu, probably had the same development as him where he could get faster, and then he ended up actually doing that. And now he's France's prodigy boy. So like how Isagi is developing his Metavision, increasing other things that will subtly affect it like his stamina, maybe Zantetsu will improve something like his breathing technique or really anything to really launch himself forward. This can literally apply to every single underrated player or players with no screen time, and in doing so, it makes a lot of sense plot-wise. You're getting the underdeveloped characters some more development by making them have an absolute weapon, and since we know how broken an absolute weapon is, or at least a super strong developed weapon, they're going to be actually put in contention for the Japan U20 team. Adam Blake and Tokimitsu is a comparison I made a lot in the tier list video, and if Tokimitsu had a physique like Adam Blake, which I also classify as his absolute weapon, Tokimitsu would be a monster and he'd be someone you'd want to put in your roster. Compare that to how it was before in the Japan U20 arc. As we saw before, he wasn't picked for the Japan U20 team only as a sub. If he built a physique like Adam Blake, which I'm not entirely sure if it's possible, he can use his other weapons like stamina and speed to basically push into these players. It'd be way more of a debate to see who is joining the team and mixing it up, since all these players got buffed and we also got characters that got spotlight out of nowhere like Corona. In the Japan U20 arc, it was kind of predictable who would be on the team. Obviously, none of the characters that didn't get developed would just show up going god mode on the pitch. But now that we have time and they've taken the time to develop these random characters like Corona or Ryusei, they'll end up being in contention for the team unlike last time. Ryusei can turn his stamina into an absolute weapon, so he has an ace blocking playstyle like Lorenzo. Corona can really focus on his fast passes to synergize and link up with fast playstyles like Isagi. Absolute weapons just make sense for all these underdeveloped characters who are known for specific weapons. So absolute weapons, in my opinion, is what is going to shape the rest of Bluelock because it'll 1, push the plot forward, and 2, it's just a good way to develop characters. If this is the case, other characters can just have absolute weapons, and then they can just keep the flexible characters way more flexible and give them way more skills. And I think we'll get to see that in a lot of underrated characters, and even our boy Isagi, I expect him to make his Metavision just crazy good. If you watched to the end, thank you so much for watching again. I make a lot of other Bluelock content just like this, so subscribe if you want to see more of that. Comment down what you think of absolute weapons, if they're better than a flexible playstyle, or if you think we'll even get some spotlight on them. My name's Hiryo, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.